Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Matt here, and in this video I'm going to be checking out the Arken EP5 5-25 by 56 Riflescope. You can see here it's already mounted on my Voodoo 360, and I plan to simply test it by running it in some upcoming matches. In the next 3 weeks I have 3 matches to shoot. 2 of them are in the States, which we'll be traveling to, and the last one is an NRL 22 style club level match that I also plan to run the scope for to test it out a little bit. Now, the Arken EP5 here is something I've wanted to try out for a long time, but ever since Arken announced it, probably a little bit over a year ago now, it's proven itself really hard to acquire, especially here in Canada. Arken seems to have a little bit of an issue meeting their demand, which is probably a good problem to have, but every time there's a restock, they sell out almost immediately, so it's been really hard to source one. I will say at the time of filming this video, Go Big Tactical just got a fairly large shipment of EP5s in, so if you're in Canada and interested in trying one of these, obviously check out Go Big Tactical. That's where I got mine from.
Impact. Back. Impact. Back. Impact. Impact. Impact.
Oh, impact. Target down.
3, 4,
5.
what the fuck? Ooh. Impact. Impact.
Alright, so it's been about 3 weeks since I filmed the initial portion of this video, and since then I've shot 3 rimfire matches with the EP5 in this configuration here, sitting in a pair of MDT Elite rings on top of my Voodoo Gunworks rifle. And I will say the EP5 was a great little scope to use. I enjoyed using it quite a bit, and it actually exceeded my expectations in more than one way. So overall, very happy with the scope. We're going to take a closer look at it in a second. But before then, if you're wondering if the EP5 can perform right up there in a rimfire match with some of the big dogs, well, I have an answer for you in the form of this awesome trophy that I was able to bring home. I was able to shoot first overall at a Sheepdog Warrior match. Now this match at Sheepdog Warrior was actually the regional finale for the New England region for the PRS Rimfire series. And I was very happy with that. Again, I was able to place first overall, and I was shooting against some very skilled shooters with some much higher end glass than the EP5. So obviously this thing can perform. It didn't hold me back at all. I was able to see the detail that I needed to see in order to make good corrections. And it was kind of funny because driving down to that match, there was a bunch of us carpooling, and some of them were wondering if I was going to feel at a disadvantage shooting the EP5 coming from my Minox. But obviously that wasn't the case, and I'm glad that the EP5 was able to perform at such a high level. Now we are going to take a closer look at it and talk about my initial impressions, and I still say initial impressions because 3 weeks is long enough where I can definitely figure out what I like and what I don't like about a particular optic, but it's nowhere long enough where I can say it's proven its long-term durability to me. So it's going to be interesting to see how the EP5 performs going forward, and if I have to ever do an update because something happens or whatever, obviously I'll do that. Before we go on to the scope itself, I did want to quickly show what comes in the box as well as take a look at the box itself. Again, very quickly, but here we do have 2 stickers, which I'm always a big fan of stickers, so these are fun. An owner's manual, which I did have to reference because I wasn't familiar with how the zero stop system worked in the scope. And there's also good information here about the reticle and whatnot. In this little package here, we have an Allen key. Now this Allen key is for all the little set screws on the turrets, as well as a cleaning cloth. You have a rubber bikini style lens cover for the scope, and they were nice enough to include a sunshade. I believe it also came with a battery, I can't really remember, but it's not a big deal either way. Taking a quick look at the box itself now, I did want to take a look at this because on paper this is a full feature PRS scope that can provide everything you might want to look for in a scope for a PRS match. On this side of the box, these are basically just saying that it's durable, which is great. That is definitely needed in a PRS match where you might be bumping your scope up on barricades and whatnot. Now these three are really good. Obviously you want a zero stop, first focal plane reticle, and ED glass. Now ED glass is really nice to see. ED stands for extra low dispersion, and it's a good starting point because if you see the term like HD, for example, the SH4 from Arken has HD glass, and to me HD is more or less just like a marketing term. It really doesn't mean anything, whereas you actually have to have ED glass in order to say it. So extra low dispersion glass is supposed to help with the overall image quality as well as cut down on chromatic aberrations. So that's again a really good starting point. And on the other side here, precision tracking, which is obviously very important for a PRS style scope for your elevation dialing as well as your return to zero. But anyway, quick look at the box there, very promising on paper. Going on to the scope now, I do want to first start by saying overall I absolutely love the design and aesthetics of the EP5. I know it totally doesn't matter for the function of the scope, but I think they did a really good job. All the controls here have like this nice frag pattern that not only looks great, but also gives you a nice grip in order to move all the dials that you need to move with or without gloves on. So they did a good job on that. Again, I just think it's a really sharp looking scope. Talking about the glass quality of the Arken EP5, I did bring it along with these two rifle scopes several times to the range to do some side-by-side comparison. Nothing super technical, but this one here is my wife's Vortex Venom. And this guy here is my Strike Eagle, which I've been using off and on for the past couple years. The Venom here is the cheapest. The Arken EP5 is just under $1,000 in Canada, $900 or so. And the Strike Eagle is just over $1,000. It's like $1,150 currently in Canada. So these two, again, around the $1,000 mark. I would say between the three scopes on the table here, the best glass is in the EP5, which I was very impressed with because I have been very happy with the Strike Eagle in general. And in terms of the image detail and clarity between the Strike Eagle and the EP5, they're almost the same, if I'm honest. It was really hard to give the advantage to one or the other, but where the EP5 really takes the advantage is in how it controls chromatic aberration. Now, obviously the Arken EP5 is definitely a budget-oriented scope. It's not your super entry-level cheap scope, but it's not a tier 1 scope by any means, and that's obvious just given the price point. Here in Canada, you know, you can look at the prices, they always change, but right now it's around $900, and I really think the glass in this scope is fantastic for $900. But I do also want to mention rimfire matches specifically lend themselves really well to a budget-oriented optic like the EP5 here, performing right up there with some of the best scopes on the market simply because the targets are closer in. You know, at a PRS rimfire match, the furthest target you'll encounter usually is around 400 yards, and that's one of the closer targets at a centerfire match. The super high end glass is going to give you a little bit more image quality when the targets get out further. I'm talking, you know, past 600-700 yards, and if the lighting conditions aren't as ideal, if it's a super cloudy, overcast day. But the Arken EP5 here was fantastic, and that's also not to say that the EP5 can't perform at a centerfire match. I haven't tried myself yet, that's still to be proven, but I did take a look at this thing at much further distances. I'm talking over 1,000 yards side by side with my Minox, and obviously you're not going to get the same image quality. So I'm not saying the EP5 is going to perform right up there with the ZCOs and the Razor Gen 3s across all disciplines, but for a rimfire match, this thing can hang with the big dogs, and I kind of proved that at the sheepdog match. So the field of view for the EP5 was fine. I did notice, to me, it looked tighter than the Strike Eagle. I did have to back down my magnification a little bit more than I usually would in order to preserve the field of view for certain stages. And I did look at the specs online just to see on paper which one had a wider field of view. I can't remember which one did, but they were within a foot or two at 5 times magnification at 100 yards. So they seem to be pretty equivalent on paper, but I did find the EP5, to me, seems like it has a slightly tighter field of view than the Strike Eagle. The eyebox on the EP5 was totally fine. I didn't have any issues with it. So as long as I don't have any issues with it in a PRS style match, that's good to go in my opinion. Let's move on to the controls. So all the controls on the EP5 are very functional. The magnification ring is absolutely perfect. The tension is exactly what I want it to be. And if you watch my videos, you might notice that I've completely done away with throw levers because I just don't generally move my magnification in a stage, and they're just kind of in the way. But if I do, this is perfect tension. Going on to the parallax adjustment knob, this thing is amazing. This on the EP5 might be the best parallax knob that I have felt on any scope, and I'm not exaggerating. This thing is awesome, butter smooth, perfect tension. A lot of scopes have parallax adjustments that are just way too stiff. This one also has numbers indicating the yardage markings that I found to be fairly accurate at the magnification that I run, so that was quite nice as well. And then on the side here, you also have an illumination adjustment that has 6 levels of brightness with an off position between each one. That leaves us with the clickety-click turrets that everyone likes to talk about, the windage and elevation turrets. They basically feel and function the same, so I'll concentrate on the elevation turret because it also obviously has the zero stop in it. This turret design has some pros and cons. It's not perfect, but I'll start with what I like about it. The legibility of this turret is probably one of the best on the market. You can just see how big and honking those numbers are. It's a very, very legible turret, and you have a lot of space to work with because they're so high and chunky. So your first set of numbers here is really bold and easy to read, and the second set of numbers is your second revolution indications, which is a little bit unnecessary for a 10 MRAT turret, but it is there because they have the space. And again, I just think it's a really visually well-designed turret that is basically impossible to misread that. So you're gonna have really good legibility in all conditions with these turrets. I had no issues whatsoever with the tracking or return to zero with these turrets, and the zero stop also works really nicely. You can see there it's a nice hard stop, and I purposely set my zero stops to be a few clicks below zero. It works very nicely and it's easy to set. Now the rest of the turret design, in my opinion, is a little bit of a cost savings. It's not very refined and it's a bit rudimentary. It's something I've seen quite often on budget-oriented scopes, and on my Athlon scopes, they also use a very similar design. Now again, you're not going to be losing any points because of this. It's completely functional and the tracking is good, but I will demonstrate to you sort of why I'm not in love with this turret design. As you input elevation into the turret, the actual turret cap will move upwards. And as it moves upwards, it exposes these lines to show you how many revolutions upwards it has gone. So this is basically the most cost-effective way of putting a rev indicator into your turret. Now to me, it's not super obvious and not very helpful, and I generally just ignore the amount of lines below my turret anyway. And a bigger reason why is because depending on where inside the internal elevation you are with the turret, you can already have lines exposed at your zero. So if your zero just so happened to be here, well, you already have 2 lines exposed. So it kind of makes things confusing, especially if you're putting this on different rifles and has different amount of lines for each zero. This zero stop system is also something that's pretty rudimentary and works with the fact that the turret moves up and down. You have a set screw here that runs straight down the elevation turret and hits a bumper. So you'll set that when this turret is zeroed out. So when you go back to zero, that set screw is going to hit up against the bumper and stop the turret from rotating. Pretty straightforward. Now as you rotate out and put elevation into the turret is rising. So the stop screw that you have set is now rising past that bumper. So after the first revolution, it's cleared that stopper inside, so it allows it to travel beyond that. So again, it works hand in hand with the fact that the turret moves up and down. It is clever, but it's just an easy sort of cost-effective way of putting a rev indicator and a zero stop cheaply into a scope. Arken did do a good job with this zero stop system with a set screw here and a set screw for the set screw, where you don't have to take off the turret to set the zero stop like on my Athlons that have like a little collar design, but it's basically the same thing. But I think that is definitely a bit of an improvement over having to remove the turret in order to set the zero stop. So that is a bonus, but again, it's still a bit of a rudimentary design, and unfortunately you do have a lot of set screws on the turrets to deal with. You have 3 on the windage and 5 total on the elevation. You have 1 for the zero stop, 1 for the zero stop set screw, and then you have the 3 in order to slip the turret back to 0. So there's a lot of tiny little set screws on the turret. Not really a fan of that, but again, it does work and it is functional, so you're not going to drop any points once it's set properly. Now I also did want to mention my opinion about the clicks and the actual feel of the turret as you're dialing it. I know a lot of people will take a scope and they'll slowly turn it, and if it sounds clicky, they think it's the best turret ever. But in my opinion, it goes far beyond that. This turret has an issue, again, similar to what I found on some of my Athlon scopes, and that's that the clicks are individually very nice and crisp, but the actual spin of the turret can be a little bit skippy or jumpy. So if you go to dial quickly, you can see there how it's not really smooth. It's sort of skipping around and stuttering. And again, you're not really gonna have any issues with this in a match. It's not a big deal. It just doesn't feel nice. It just feels like it's skipping around, and controlling the single click increments can also be a little bit difficult. So if I want to input one click, sometimes it'll skip 2 or 3. So I have to be a lot more deliberate with the single click inputs into this turret. These are sort of small details I'm nitpicking, but I did want to mention that because I hear a lot of people say these are great turrets because they're super clicky. But I think if you're really using this in a match setting and dialing quickly, this is something that you also have to consider. Just to give an example, this is not a fair comparison whatsoever, but here is a Razer Gen 3 that I recently acquired, and this has pretty nice turrets. The reason why the other one is skippy, the best way I can describe it is because the harshness of the clicks isn't well balanced with the actual tension in the turret itself. So the EP5 here has really nice harsh clicks, but it doesn't have the tension in the turret to balance it out. So that's kind of what makes it skippy. The Razer Gen 3 here has pretty nice harsh clicks as well, but the tension in the turret is a little bit stiffer, which gives it a much more fluid feel when you go to dial. You can feel and hear each individual click even when you're going quickly on the turret. Another example here is on my Minox, which again is a pretty high-end scope. But the clicks on this turret are even closer together because this is 15 mrad per revolution, so it's 50% more clicks per revolution. So these clicks aren't as harsh, but it's still very well balanced with the turret tension, where if you dial it, you can feel each click individually, even when you go fast. It's a really nice feeling turret. And again, the single click increments are really easy to do, even when they're so closely spaced together, providing you 15 mrad per revolution. All right, so I am filming through the EP5 now, and if you've ever tried to film through your rifle scope, hopefully you can appreciate the amount of effort I have put into getting this scope footage. But this is what Arken calls the VPR reticle, and it's a decent reticle. Now, in any reticle choice, there's a ton of personal preference, so just keep in mind this is totally my opinion. But generally speaking, the Christmas tree is good for holdovers, and what I did notice is you actually have 12 mrad of holdovers in the Christmas tree. Most of my other scopes, I think, max out at 8 or 10, so seeing 12 mrad of holdover is quite a bit. So that's really good for you holdover nuts. Now, zooming into the reticle here, the first thing I'm not a huge fan of is the middle sort of bolded crosshair. I think if you plan to use this scope in some hunting situations, this would be good because the bolded crosshair sort of attracts your attention, which is what it's designed to do, but I don't like it. I wish the line thickness in the middle was consistent with the rest of the reticle because I find it a little bit distracting. And the other thing I'm not in love with is the fact that it only has 0.5 mrad marks for the main portion of the reticle axes. Now, it's not a huge deal. I'm still comfortable in using it, but I definitely prefer a little bit of a finer resolution in the markings, like a 0.2 mrad. Talking about the illumination of this reticle, the only part that's illuminated on this reticle is that center bolded crosshair. So if I turn the illumination on here, you'll see only that middle crosshair section is illuminated, which again for hunting I think makes sense. But for what I prefer for like a PRS style match, I'd rather have the entire reticle illuminated. Here is the reticle backed out to 5 times power. That is at 10 times, 16 times. This is where I generally shoot my matches in terms of magnification. Is around 14 to 16. And at the max, 25 times magnification. So overall, I think the Arken EP5 is a really good scope for your consideration. It has a full feature set for PRS style matches, really good glass for the price point, and all the controls work as they should. The tracking is flawless and the return to zero. Again, as I mentioned, the turrets might not feel as premium as some higher end scopes, but it's not a higher end scope. It's exactly where it should be, and I think it's really awesome. So this is going to be interesting to see how it performs going forward for some more long-term testing, especially in the upcoming winter months, because I find rifle scopes are really stressed to their max in the winter in terms of keeping out the moisture and all the condensation and stuff, as well as having the turrets perform in the much colder temperatures that we get here. Now, I am realistic, you know, when the temperatures go below -15, -20, a lot of turrets seize to the point where you don't really want to reef on them too hard because you're probably going to break something. But we'll see how this works. I do plan to run it through the winter, and if I have to do any updates, I will. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed the video. As usual, I'll do my best to answer any questions. If not, I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care. Cheers.